Former U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policies targeting Canada, Mexico, and China have intensified the global trade agenda. Canada and Mexico faced 25% tariffs, while some Chinese products were hit with tariffs as high as 60%. Meanwhile, Europe was next in line for Trump's trade measures.
European leaders are expected to discuss Donald Trump's latest tariff threats as they gather today in Brussels for a meeting on defense.
This time, Trump aimed his tariff decisions at the European Union.
Et si nous étions attaqués sur des sujets commerciaux, l'Europe, comme une puissance qui se tient, devra se faire respecter.
The President of the United States stated that EU tariffs would be announced soon, emphasizing that the United Kingdom would need to address this issue over time. These shocking remarks sparked significant concern among EU member states, as the EU bloc assessed the implications of Trump's tax announcements. French President Emmanuel Macron took a decisive countermeasure.
In our view, protectionism more generally will harm citizens, no matter where they reside. And that
French President Emmanuel Macron made surprising statements on tariffs, ones that even Donald Trump might not have anticipated. Today, we'll break down the key details of Macron's remarks and explore how other EU member states responded. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay updated with our latest content. Now, let's get started. As EU leaders pushed for talks in response to Trump's threat of imposing heavy tariffs, Macron took a firm stance. Speaking at the informal EU Defense Summit in Brussels, he asserted that member states must be prepared to counter US tariffs if EU interests are targeted. He emphasized that if the US intensifies its trade measures, Europe as a global power must stand strong, demand respect, and respond accordingly. Macron called for a more unified and forceful European approach to global trade pressures.
Today, I think that it's not enough to have a banking union, we also need to have a defense union.
French President Emmanuel Macron emphasized the need for Europe to strengthen its industrial and technological infrastructure, increase defense spending, and adopt a strategic economic approach to reduce reliance on foreign powers. He proposed an action plan that includes boosting public and private sector financing, reforming the European Investment Bank's financial mechanisms, and prioritizing European industry and procurement decisions. Macron urged EU partners to align with France's efforts to expand defense investments, stressing that Europe must act collectively in key sectors. His statements were widely seen as a retaliatory response amid growing concerns over trade tensions with the United States following the inauguration of President Donald Trump. In essence, Macron was already preparing for Trump's hardline stance against Europe. French Industry Minister Marc Ferrat argued that trade negotiations with Washington should incorporate a power dynamic, suggesting that any European response should target products vital to the US and be strategically impactful. François Villeroy de Galhau, governor of the Bank of France, described Trump's tariffs as draconian, warning that they would heighten economic uncertainty and pose a serious concern. The EU also deliberated on the matter in greater detail. The bloc's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, warned that a trade war would produce no winners. European Council President Antonio Costa stated that EU member states, in consultation with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, agreed that a stronger European defense sector would reinforce the transatlantic partnership. Rutte pointed out that the US sells significantly more defense equipment to Europe than vice versa, emphasizing the substantial financial flow in the defense sector. As European NATO allies ramp up military spending, he argued, the US stands to benefit greatly, giving Trump even more leverage in tariff negotiations. European nations largely backed Macron's firm stance against US tariffs, advocating for a more assertive EU response to the issue.
So the UK is way out of line, and we'll see the UK, but European Union is really out of line.
C'est simple, nous on pense que la priorité, elle est à cet agenda stratégique et sécurité de nos frontières. Et si nous étions attaqués sur des sujets commerciaux.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz stated that the EU is resilient enough to respond to any US trade tariffs. However, their primary goal is to foster cooperation.
I think that we have to do everything to avoid this totally unnecessary and stupid tariff wars or trade wars.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who firmly believes in the mutual dependence of Europe and the United States, stressed that a trade war would be a grave mistake. He urged all efforts to prevent conflicts among allies, especially in the face of Russian threats and Chinese expansionism. Meanwhile, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen reaffirmed that Copenhagen would never support a war against its allies. However, she warned that if the Trump administration imposed harsh tariffs on Europe, it would face a strong and unified response. Despite rising tensions over tariff disputes and unresolved issues, leaders called for increased dialogue with Washington to ease the situation.
Definitely happened with the European Union, I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin emphasized the need for the EU and the United States to collaborate constructively on trade, warning that protectionism harms citizens everywhere. Meanwhile, Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo urged Europe to engage in trade negotiations with Trump and highlighted Russia as the biggest threat to the continent.
C'est simple, nous on pense que la priorité, elle est à cet agenda stratégique et de sécurité de nos frontières. Et si nous étions attaqués sur les sujets commerciaux.
Luxembourg Prime Minister Luc Frieden stated that the best response to trade tariffs is to counter with similar measures, though he emphasized that tariffs are always detrimental. Meanwhile, Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo expressed the EU's commitment to open trade in a globalized market. However, he cautioned against naivety, asserting that the EU would take necessary steps to protect its industries and maintain fair competition. EU leaders largely supported French President Emmanuel Macron's stance on the issue, but their primary approach was to resolve the tariff dispute through diplomatic dialogue. Macron, however, has been the most vocal EU leader in recent days regarding Donald Trump's plan to impose tariffs on the EU. If Trump proceeds with additional tariffs rather than negotiating with France, the future relationship between the two countries could face serious challenges. Contrary to expectations, US-France relations have already worsened significantly in recent years. Tensions existed before Trump announced the tariffs, beginning with his first day in office when he withdrew the US from the Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization, moves that signaled a shift in diplomatic ties. Historically, US-France relations saw a positive turn in 2007 when Nicolas Sarkozy, often referred to as the American Sarkozy, was elected as France's president. However, after his tenure, relations gradually declined. On July 12, 2017, Trump visited France at Macron's invitation, and in April 2018, Macron addressed the US Congress, urging the US to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. This prompted US Congressman Thomas Massie to label Macron as a socialist, militarist, globalist, and science alarmist. Tensions escalated further in late 2018 when Trump mocked Macron over nationalism, tariffs, France's World War II defeat, European defense plans, and his approval ratings. Following Trump's controversial Armistice Day visit to Paris, criticism poured in from both France and the US. By December, Macron openly condemned Trump's decision to withdraw American troops from Syria. In April 2019, France's outgoing ambassador to the US, Gerard Araud, described Trump's administration as increasingly isolated, while Macron questioned America's commitment to Europe later that year. Trump's latest move to impose tariffs on the EU has only deepened the strain between the two nations. Despite past diplomatic tensions, economic ties between the US and France have been strong. Trade between the two nations rebounded significantly after the COVID-19 pandemic, reaching record highs. However, Trump's tariff decision threatens to disrupt this mutually beneficial relationship, potentially harming both economies. Understanding these risks requires a closer examination of the economic interdependence between France and the United States before the imposition of these new tariffs. In 2022, trade declined due to falling prices, reduced French beverage exports, and decreased cruise ship activity. Despite these setbacks, bilateral trade levels between the United States and France remained higher than pre-pandemic levels. While there were no major disputes between the two countries, economic fluctuations raised concerns. Trade in goods between the US and France totaled 97 billion euros in 2023, marking a decrease of 12.4 billion euros from 2022, according to French customs data. Imports and exports declined across all major product categories, though France maintained a trade surplus of 15.9 billion euros. Meanwhile, trade and services grew by around 2%, reaching 70.4 billion euros in 2023. French service imports increased by 1.7% to 27.3 billion euros, while exports of goods rose by the same percentage to 43.2 billion euros, though both rankings dropped by one position compared to the previous year. In 2023, the United States remained France's fourth largest consumer and fifth largest supplier. After 4 consecutive years of trade surpluses, the bilateral trade balance shifted to a deficit of 13.3 billion euros in 2022, remaining negative in 2023 but improving to 6.6 billion euros. Key drivers of French exports to the US in 2023 included the aeronautical industry, pharmaceuticals, and beverages. However, exports in all 3 sectors declined compared to 2022, with beverage exports dropping by 1 billion euros, 20.6%, marking a record decline. Other sectors experiencing significant downturns included cruise ships and pharmaceuticals. On the other hand, rising wind turbine exports boosted trade in general-purpose machinery and tools, ranking 4th behind cosmetics and perfumes. Although economic ties between the United States and France have fluctuated over time, they have remained free from direct conflict. However, due to actions taken by Donald Trump, additional economic tensions between the two nations are now expected. This may prompt France to seek alternative economic alliances. One potential partner is China, with whom France has significantly strengthened ties in recent years through high-level discussions, cooperation agreements, and shared commitments on global affairs. A key moment in Sino-French relations came in April 2023 when French President Emmanuel Macron visited Beijing. During this visit, new agreements were signed, symbolizing a deepening partnership. Both nations emphasized the importance of managing global spillover effects and pledged to support diplomatic efforts in resolving the Ukrainian crisis. Following the conference, Chinese President Xi Jinping expressed appreciation for the positive impact of their economic relations. The signing of 18 cooperation agreements between French and Chinese businesses further underscored this growing partnership. Additionally, Xi's visit to Europe, his first in 5 years, highlighted renewed optimism and reinforced the benefits of diplomatic engagement. A year later, in May, she met Macron in Haute-Pyrénées, France, where their discussions covered a wide range of global issues. Their talks reinforced mutual commitments to strengthening ties not only between China and France, but also with the European Union. While Macron emphasized the importance of maintaining Europe's strategic independence while fostering stronger relations with China, she reaffirmed China's commitment to national unity and cross-cultural engagement with France. These discussions reflected collaborative efforts to enhance cooperation and stabilize global affairs, highlighting the growing significance of Sino-French relations on the world stage. Historically, interactions between France and China have been varied. Since the 17th century, the two nations have shared a rich and complex past. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, France was heavily involved in trade with China. However, diplomatic relations deteriorated after France recognized Taiwan in the mid-20th century, leading to a suspension of ties. Relations were restored in 1964, and since then, both countries have engaged in frequent high-level negotiations, forming various agreements to strengthen their relationship. Despite differences in political systems and ideologies, recent years have seen a reduction in tensions. A major milestone came in 2004 with the establishment of the Franco-Chinese Strategic Alliance, aimed at fostering cooperation in trade, business, culture, and education. This alliance enhanced diplomatic ties and paved the way for broader collaboration. Another key development was the signing of the China-France Joint Declaration on Climate Change in 2015, which underscored both nations' commitment to addressing global warming and advancing sustainable development. This declaration played a crucial role in the negotiations leading to the Paris Agreement later that year. Since taking office in 2017, French President Emmanuel Macron has prioritized strengthening economic and cultural relations between France and China, recognizing their importance to France's economic growth and global influence. On his first official visit to China in January 2018, he signed several agreements on nuclear energy, agriculture, and tourism, while urging China to address trade imbalances and market access concerns. Macron has also advocated for deeper cooperation between Europe and China. Despite challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic and France's initial skepticism toward China's Belt and Road Initiative, economic relations between the two nations have remained strong. China's growing economic influence was evident in 2019 when it became France's top foreign investment source. The two nations signed agreements spanning various sectors, including green finance, intellectual property rights, and civil aviation. Strengthening ties were further reflected in 2021 when trade volumes between France and China reached unprecedented levels. According to China's Ministry of Commerce, MOFCOM, bilateral trade has surged nearly 800 times over 6 decades since diplomatic relations were officially established. By 2023, trade between the two nations reached $78.9 billion, making China France's most significant trading partner outside the European Union. Despite this growth, France's trade deficit with China widened significantly, rising from 1.1 billion euros in 2022 to 2.92 billion euros in 2023. This imbalance highlights France's increasing reliance on Chinese goods. Meanwhile, data from the United Nations Comtrade International Trade Database suggests a potential shift in China's imports from France, hinting at an evolving trade dynamic. In 2023, China's top exports to France included electrical and electronic equipment, machinery, energy components, boilers, furniture, lighting, prefabricated buildings, and vehicles. As tensions over tariffs between the US and the EU continue, France appears to be strengthening its economic ties with China, particularly in response to increasing pressure from the US under Donald Trump's trade policies. French President Emmanuel Macron's recent strong statements suggest that France may further expand trade with China, posing a challenge to both the US and the EU. Experts argue that resolving the tariff dispute between the EU and the US should be approached through diplomacy rather than retaliation. The outcome of this trade conflict remains uncertain,